Three guys are standing at the pearly gates. St. Peter says to them, "In order for me to let you in, you have to tell me the meaning of Easter." The first guy says, "Well, Easter, that's when children dress up in costumes and go door to door asking for candy." No, says St. Peter. That's Halloween. The second guy says, "Easter, that's when a family gathers around a table for a turkey and a big meal, and we offer thanks." No, says Peter. That's Thanksgiving. The third guy says, "Well, Easter, that's where in the garden tomb the stone rolls away from the tomb's entrance." St. Peter nods, yes. And then Jesus comes out. And if he sees his shadow, we have 6 more weeks Today is what is traditionally known in the church as Low Sunday. That is because oftentimes the Sunday immediately following Easter, where you have capacity crowds, has a very low attendance. Thank you for bucking that trend. This is a wonderfully wonderful for any week. Thank you. Also, after Holy Week, and after multiple nights of service, and after the preacher and the choir and the worship leaders have put their all into these services, in some cases from dusk till dawn after Easter, there's what preacher friends of mine refer to as Holy Week hangover. On the Monday following Holy Week, there's this kind of, you bottom out and you're tired. So Holy Humor Sunday is something that developed among what traditionally has been known as the Black church tradition. The idea that on Easter, God plays the ultimate trick on the devil by raising Jesus from the dead. And so Holy Humor Sunday is a way to follow Easter and continue the season of Easter, but to do so in a way that recognizes that in some cases, attendance may be down and the worship leaders are tired. So it gives people just a chance to relax and to laugh and to have fun. Many times preachers on Holy Sunday will not offer a sermon, but just tell jokes for 10 minutes or so. I'm not going to do that today. But I do want to celebrate that God gives us bodies. And just like God gives us minds to think, and so we develop theologies to think about how we relate to God. God gives us the ability to laugh, and we use humor as a way of dealing with the hardships of life. I find it interesting that almost every funeral I've ever been to, there's been some time in the service where the congregation breaks out in laughter. And it's not because the preacher told a joke, that wouldn't be appropriate, but it's because something very specific to the life of the person that everyone is gathered to celebrate is mentioned. Something that those who knew him or her very well can appreciate. And people laugh and they share in that. And it's very cathartic and it's very healing. When it comes to somebody trying to make us feel down, someone who is trying to humiliate us and laugh at us, that person is being a bully. When somebody laughs at or demeans an entire group of people, that person is being a bigot. But when somebody shares some kind of a joke or jab that makes fun of us and we can laugh with them, that's holy work. That's something that expresses a very close relationship that we have with that person. That is something that represents a sacred bond. The joke that I began the sermon with today is the kind of thing that might make some people uncomfortable. But keep in mind, with a joke like that, we're not laughing at God, we're laughing at ourselves. When it comes to the work of theologians, what they do, if we consider it, is pretty audacious. Because theology involves trying to read God's mind, trying to decide what God is up to. What is God thinking? What is God's motivation in all of this? That's something that one of my seminary professors said should meet all of us with a profound sense of humility. Being able to kind of laugh at ourselves and admit our limits is one of the ways we address that. There's a story about the great theologian of the first half of the 20th century, Karl Barth. Barth was a theologian in Europe, and he wrote voluminously volumes and volumes on theology. His great work was a 12-volume work entitled The Church Dogmatic, or in his native tongue, the Kirchliche Dogmatik. I had just one volume of this assigned for a class I was taking in seminary. And one volume was that thick, and the type in there was the size of the type in those pocket New Testaments that the Gideons hand out. I was daunted by this and relieved when my professor decided he would just assign us a passage from the book, which he could copy, rather than the entire book itself. But Karl Barth said about himself towards the end of his life that he imagined someday he would be walking on the streets of heaven, pulling behind him his little red wagon, loaded up with all 12 volumes of his church dogmatic, and the angels would look at him and laugh. That represents an amazing sense of humility that is always good to accompany any time we seek to discuss or explore theology. Now, holy humor is not the kind of thing that I want us to do 52 weeks out of the year. That leads to irreverence. But it is good to take this one Sunday to remind us how humor is something that we all celebrate together and share, and something that produces a very healthy humility within us. I have a personal belief that those among us who are the staunchest and most humorless will someday find themselves before the judgment throne of God. And when they have boldly proclaimed what they believed and what they did and didn't do, they will hear the sounds of the angels' laughter. Theology is our creation. Doctrine, dogma, it's what we create so that we can think and interact about how we see God and how we serve God, how we worship God and share God with others. Theology is for us. But I personally believe that when God hears us recite our theologies, that to a God who is omnipotent and all-powerful, a God who is Alpha and Omega, who has no beginning and no end, when God hears us recite our theology, I imagine it feels to God's ear the way it does to you and me when we hear a preschooler recite a nursery rhyme or tell us a joke. You know that if you've ever had that experience, we don't learn a lot from it, but we certainly delight in it. We feel privileged that they shared it with us, and we are the better for having experienced that. And that, I believe personally, on an emotional level, is how God takes our theologies. Holy Humor Sunday is a Sunday to celebrate the fact that God gave us bodies and lungs and the ability to produce laughter. And we have created humor as a way of celebrating God's world. When someone else seeks to bring us down and make us feel soft, when somebody deliberately tries to humiliate us, that is degrading. But when we seek through humility and all to bring ourselves down, to keep ourselves and our mortality in a comfortable distance and connection with God, then that is holy humor. That is a humility that is a gift for God. And rather than being painful, it's accommodated by laughter. Amen.